So the new starter decks for the coming year have been released in the midweek Magic event. So we're going to have a look at those new 2-color starter decks that are going to replace these ones that have been around for a year or so, and have a look at the key cards in those decks, how you can basically win games with them, what's the best strategies, and how friendly they are to standard players. Let's have a look. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go through these decks one by one, so don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on any future videos. And we're going to start with the first deck here, which is Arcane Aggression. This is our blue and red spells deck, which has a lot of blue and red staple cards that might work well in other decks. But the question is, does it work well together? Does it work well as this one deck? So we have Tolarian Terror, we have Haughty Djinn, so it's kind of like that mono blue deck, but with some red mixed in as well. We've got Urabrask, who works really well in a red spells deck. So do they work well together? Well, I guess we'll find out by testing this out. We have the Chrome Host Seed Shark. So whenever we cast non-creature spells, we can incubate. So we make lots of incubator tokens as well. So there's lots of different strategies around creating tokens, like the Third Path Iconoclast and Rouse Reinforcements to go wider. And obviously we have Convoke with Meeting of the Minds. We can protect our big things with Shore Up. And we have this really good spell, which is one of the Lord of the Rings one. If you control a wizard, you get to choose 2 of these 3 modes rather than just 1. And we have a few things that are wizards. We have the Electrostatic Infantry. The Gitu Amplifier is a wizard. The Gitu Embercoiler, which is an alchemy card, is also a wizard. And if you haven't noticed, we do also have Gandalf the Grey in here, who is obviously a wizard. So if we control a wizard, we get to choose 2 of these. We can draw 2 cards, so we can destroy an artifact, or we can do 5 damage to target creature, all for 3 mana, which is actually really good. And obviously Gandalf the Grey is there as well. A 3/4 wizard. Legendary. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we can choose one of these options to tap or untap a target permanent, do 3 damage to the opponent, copy an instant or sorcery, or put Gandalf back on the top of our library if we want to. So also Barrel and Carry Zev, which is a first strike menace, 2/4 for 3, which is pretty good as well to start with. Whenever we cast instants or sorceries, we can potentially cast another cheaper one from our hand if we have it, and if not, we get to make a 2/1 token as well. So it all works on basically going wide and making a few big things as well. Maybe the tokens protect us, give us the ability to convoke with Meeting of the Minds, and casting all these things either gets us to pop off with Urabrask, or get out a cheap Tolarian Terror, or hit them with a Haughty Djinn, or make incubator tokens. It basically does lots of things, so it's not really focused on just one strategy, but I think it works really well. I really like the blue and red starter deck that we have at the moment. The previous one is not the best like meta deck, but it is pretty effective in terms of how powerful the starter decks are. Also in the starter decks, we do get at least 1 rare land. I believe these ones are just the common ones, common 2-color lands, and we get 1 rare land in there as well. So once these are released for everyone, if you don't have all copies of these lands, then you'll be able to get extra copies of them. So yeah, any cards that are in these decks, I should also say, if you don't already have 4 copies of them, don't craft any more. Don't craft a 4th copy of Chrome Host Seed Shark if you don't have it already, because when the starter decks become available to everyone, you're going to be able to get an extra copy of that. As far as I'm aware, I can't think of it happening any other way, because if you don't have that card, you have to be given it. So yeah, you don't want to waste your wild cards by crafting a 4th copy of something if you're going to get it from these starter decks coming out, which should be, I believe, maybe towards the end of July or beginning of August. I think that's when it tends to be. So that's the green and not the green, that's the red and blue deck. Let's move on to the next one now. So next we have the green and red deck, which is Charging Ahead. It's based on, well, I feel like this is the most important card, Samut, Vizier of Naktamun. It's a first strike, vigilance, haste, 3 mana, 2/3. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, if it entered the battlefield this turn, you draw a card. So basically, if you have haste and you get creatures out and you hit the opponent with those creatures, you're drawing extra cards. You're getting a lot of card advantage, as well as being a good, fast aggro deck. We've got Feldon, that's haste. when it comes out, it can't block, which is fine, because this is kind of more of a aggressive deck. You don't need to worry so much about blocking. You can basically do 2 damage to the opponent. They don't want to block Feldon, that's the thing. They don't want to block it and do damage to it, because then you get to exile more cards from the top of your library and potentially play those. So if they don't kill Feldon and you have something like an epic confrontation, you can turn Feldon into a 3/4 and get it to kill the opponent's 3/3, and then you get to exile 3 cards off your library and choose one of those to play next turn. So that's a nice combination with Feldon and fight spells. But basically, we just want to get things out early and hit the opponent with them. The only thing of having 1 copy of Simic is you might play a game and never draw it, right? So it would be nice if you had this deck to have more copies of it, but this is just how it's starting. So we've also got Tomical Phoenix, which is a 3-mana 2/2 flying haste Phoenix creature. It can come back from the graveyard if you pay more to bring it back. Again, haste creature does damage on its first turn. We have the Warmonger, which is a 3/2 haste. You can look at the top 6 cards of your library and reveal a dragon from among them, put it into your hand. So there are a few different dragons we have in the deck. We've also got Rampaging Raptor, a 4-mana trample haste that can get bigger. The Ogre Battle Driver gives everything else haste. This is one of those arena staple cards, so it's not in a particular set, which means it's not standard legal, but it really helps with this deck, giving everything +2/+0 and haste till end of turn. It also kind of works well with things like the Caryatid, because when this comes out, if it has haste, you can then tap it for mana immediately. And if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, that's 2 mana. So you can basically play this creature out. It costs 2 mana. It comes out as a 3/1 because of the Battle Driver. If you have anything else, the Battle Driver is only a 3/3, but anything else that's 4, like a Rampaging Raptor, then you can tap it for 2 mana, so you can basically play another one out and get them out. And if you can't tap it for mana, or if you don't have anything else to play, you might be able to hit with it anyway. Obviously, it's better as a ramp thing, but this is kind of an aggro deck, so you might not need the ramp quite so much. But pretty much everything else can come out with haste. The Ravenous Sailback can come out with haste. The Furnace Strider can remove an oil counter to have haste. And you've got also Surrak and Goreclaw. That's trample, gives other creatures trample, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, it's not a token, you put a +1 counter on it and it gains haste till end of turn. So very, very fast, aggressive deck. We do have a few things here that aren't standard legal. So we have Volcanic Dragon, we have the Ogre Battle Driver, the Phoenix, the Caryatid, and I think that's all of them. Everything else is like just Dominaria, not old cards that don't get to be played too much. But if you wanted to upgrade this deck, if you want to stick with dragons, you might want to put an extra couple of copies of Shivan Branchburner in there. It's the Volcanic Dragon is 6 mana for a 4/4 flying haste. This is 7 mana for a 4/4 flying haste, but you can convoke it. So if you have anything else out at the time, it's basically going to be the same cost as the Volcanic Dragon or cheaper. So take the Volcanic Dragons out, put some extra Shivan Branchburners in if you want to upgrade this. And then more copies of Simic if you had it, because it enables everything else. Probably don't need the Caryatids anyway, and they're not standard legal, so they would come out. So yeah, it's pretty much still standard legal, apart from a few things that you can easily swap out. And it's all a very low curve, quite aggressive deck. So obviously we can make things bigger as well. We have some removal. Green's never really good for removal, but it's, you know, it's okay. We've got big creatures, which we have creatures with power 2, 3, 4. Miglos can get bigger, can be a 6. So yeah, this can do some work. Cosmic Hunger and the fight spells. So yeah, it's a good deck. We get the Copperline Gorge, which is the fast red and green land in this deck as well. So if you don't have 4 copies of that, you might not need to craft a 4th one, because you should be getting one soon, hopefully. So that's the green and red deck. The next one we have is the blue and black deck. Dimir, kind of control. The most important cards we have in here are Breach the Multiverse, because it's a really, big spell that's going to steal your opponent's big thing. Or possibly mill them out, although this deck isn't really a milling deck. But yeah, so basically steal the big thing from the opponent, bring your best thing out of the graveyard as well. We got Hidetsugu and Kairi, which can draw cards, put things back on top of your library. You could possibly use Murder on your own Hidetsugu if you've got Breach the Multiverse on top of your library, so you do 7 damage to the opponent and get to cast Breach the Multiverse for free. you know, it's a good combo, but then you lose Hidetsugu, but you could bring it back with Breach the Multiverse, so that's kind of like a good way of bringing it back. It's basically spending 3 mana here to do 7 damage and cast this. And then you get to draw more spells when Hidetsugu comes back in. So that's a pretty good combo. We've also got Gix Command, which is a good sweeper, but can also give you lifelink and make the opponent sacrifice something. We've got Rusko, the Clockmaker, which can make the Midnight Clock, which comes out onto the battlefield. It can tap for blue mana, and after a few counters have been put onto it, you can then shuffle your hand and your graveyard into your library and draw 7 more cards. You can exile the clock, but Rusko makes a clock every time he enters, so if he goes into the graveyard and then comes back, you get to make another one. So it's really nice that you can basically kind of blink this in a way or recycle it and get more Midnight Clocks, because you might actually possibly be able to mill your opponent out in that you can keep your cards coming back into your deck and your opponent's going to be running out slowly over time. There's some other things that might be useful for that, like Vesuvan Mist, which is an alchemy card. You can return a target non-token, non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and if you kick it, you make a duplicate of the card into your hand as well. So you could possibly put out Rusko, use Vesuvan Mist to return it to your hand and make a copy. So now you've got 1 clock out already, and you now have 2 more Ruskos in your hand that you can cast again. So that's a nice combo there. We've also got Rizug the Bone Cobbler, which is an alchemy card, mythic, that I haven't seen before. But you can tap it to make a target creature card in your graveyard become an artifact, which gets around Go for the Throat, which I guess is the most important part of that. And you may cast it this turn as well. So any creature from your graveyard, you can basically tap this and cast back from your graveyard. And you can do that every turn. It doesn't say anything about that opponent, that creature then having to be exiled if it dies again. So you could have a Hidetsugu that dies. You bring it back with Rizug. It gets to draw more cards. If it dies again, now that it's an artifact, it could still die. And then you can just bring it back again. Surely you can bring it back every turn, right? So Rizug, no wonder that's such a such a mythic card, because you can do so many good things with that. But yes, that's the main important things in this deck. We've got Rona's Vortex and Black Sun's Twilight for some extra removal, and possibly returning creatures from your graveyard as well. And Trawler Drake is a nice threat that you put out. It starts as a 1/1, but anytime you cast a non-creature spell, which we have quite a few of here, it's going to add an extra +1/+1, or an oil counter that then basically gives it +1/+1. So it can be a good threat in the air as well. And with Hidetsugu being flying, I think you've got quite a good case for being able to fly over the opponent and do damage to them, even if you don't get to Breach the Multiverse. So it seems like it's got lots of good things going on with this deck. It looks like kind of a fun one to play with. To keep drawing cards, put them back into your library and just keep drawing them again. And possibly milling your opponent out, or just, letting them cast everything and they can't do anything because you just keep bringing things back. So that's the black and blue deck. The cards that we have that are actually alchemy specific would be Rusko, and I think it's just then Rizug, and it's not this one. Oh yeah, Murder is obviously not a particularly good destroy spell, because you probably want to use Go for the Throat or something else instead. But that's also an arena specific card, so that isn't standard legal. So that, we've got Rizug, we've got Rusko, and I think that's possibly all of them. So yeah, that's the blue and black deck. The next one we have is the white and green deck. So I've seen some standard versions of this that are going around that work really well, that have lots of botanical brawlers, and Kami of Whispered Hopes, and Ozolith the Shattered Spire. So we can put lots of counters on things with Kami and Ozolith. We can copy those counters onto Botanical Brawler, which also has Trample. So basically everything gets lots of +1 counters, and you get through with lots of damage. So it's quite a low curve aggro deck. We've also got Dusk Legion Duelist, where you add counters onto this. You get to draw a card. It's only once each turn, but still. We've got Ozolith that can tap. Oh, that's only a sorcery. I was going to say maybe you could do that on the opponent's turn, but maybe there's not. Maybe there's not anything we can do on the opponent's turn to add. Oh no, we can if we really want to. Strength of the Coalition. Probably something you'd rather use when you're attacking with lots of creatures. If you want to kick this and pay 4 mana to give something +2/+2 and then put a +1 counter on each creature you control. Seems like the kind of thing you'd want to do when you're attacking rather than defending. But you could possibly do that. Titania's Command is a sorcery, and Storm the Seed Core is a sorcery as well. So lots of ways to add +1 counters at sorcery speed. We've got some removal with Citizen's Arrest. We've got Bushwhack that can be used as a fight spell if we need it. And we tend to get a big Botanical Brawler when you're playing this, so a fight spell works out pretty well with that. We've got Beast Caller that adds +1 counters whenever you cast creature spells and can redistribute those counters onto something else when it dies, which is really nice as well. Clay Champion comes in at the very least as an 8/8 if you cast it for 4 green mana, but you might cast it for 2 green and 2 white. You can pay extra because of the X cost, because it's X4. So 4 is the minimum, and it still comes out as an 8/8 if you cast it for 4 forests. But if you want to cast it for more, if you have more mana, you can. And with Kami of Whispered Hopes, we can basically add lots and lots of mana. And it can be of any color. So we can go with all white, or we can go with all green. And then Clay Champion can come out and add lots of counters onto things as well. Then we've got Sarah's Redeemer. When things come out that are small, you can add 2 +1 counters onto them, or more if we have Kami or Ozolith. That gets copied onto Botanical Brawler as well. And Titania's Command, which, to be honest, the most important part of this card, the most important thing that you can do with it, is to add 2 +1/+1 counters onto each creature you control. So everything gets boosted like crazy. You can choose 2, so you can also exile a graveyard. You can search for 2 land cards, or you can create 2 2/2 bear creature tokens. But you want to basically just add loads of counters onto things. You want to protect Botanical Brawler as much as possible. And yeah, add counters on and smash away with this this counters deck that does spiral out of control with Botanical Brawler. If you wanted to upgrade it, you'd probably add some more of those. Maybe take out something like Ruin's Recluse. I don't know, Reach and Death Touch is nice. Put a +1 counter on itself for 4 mana, which is kind of expensive. So maybe you probably wouldn't want those in there. We've got some alchemy cards. We've got Sylvan Smite, where you put a +1 counter on a creature you control if you weren't the starting player. So if you're on the draw, you get to do that. But other than that, it's also a bite spell. You get to do your damage of one of your creatures to another creature you control. So they don't fight. It just does the damage that way. And then we've got one other alchemy card here, which is the Benalish Knight Counselor, a 2/1 that can enlist. Only costs 1 to come out, and when it enlists something, you get a boon where your next creature enters with another +1 counter on it, which is a nice thing to add to this deck. I mean, there are other 1-drops that might work better, such as the what's it called, Bond Warden, that comes out with a counter. When it dies, you can add the counter onto something else. It's kind of similar in a way, but yeah. So that's Growing Hope. It's a pretty good green and white deck. I think it looks kind of fun to play, and you get the fast green and white land as part of this one as well. So on to the next one. We have the Soldiers deck, the white and blue or Azorius Soldiers deck. Again, it's kind of similar to the meta deck that's going around, but it doesn't have as many copies of the cards that really make it work. So we have Harbin, which is the biggest thing, right? We want to have Harbin in there because we want to have 5 soldiers, attack with all of them. They all get +1/+1 and flying. And so if your opponent has lots of creatures out on the ground, you can just fly over all of them and do a ton of damage. If we have things like Valiant Veteran, Sky Strike Officer makes other soldiers, Valiant Veteran boosts them all. Resolute Reinforcements puts 2 soldiers out. Siege Veteran puts +1 counters onto creatures you control, and if a non-token soldier dies, it gets replaced by a token. And we've also got Eotian Tactician that adds +1/+1 to all other soldiers as well. And we've got some other cheap soldiers, some removal here. We've got a few things that can flash. So we've got Resolute Reinforcements, but we also have Ambush Paratrooper, which is one the opponent might not be expecting. And we have Zephyr Sentinel, which is flash, but it's flying. You can put it out on the battlefield and return another creature you control to your hand. If it was a soldier, you put a +1 counter on the Sentinel. So it's a flying 3/2 for 2, and you get to protect something. Maybe if the opponent's trying to kill, I don't know, a Valiant Veteran, you can put this out, save the Veteran, bring it back to your hand, and then get a +1 counter on the Sentinel. So that's kind of a nice combo there. We've also got Mirror Shield of Argive, which is a really good way of shutting down control decks or anything that wants to play instants on your turn, because they can't cast spells, activate abilities of artifacts or creatures or enchantments on your turn. So it shuts those down. It basically means that your opponent's Your opponent needs to basically deal with it on their own turn. They can't deal with this on your turn. And when you attack, you get to make X soldier tokens, where X is the number of soldiers you already control. So if you have lots of soldiers, you attack with this, you're going to make loads more. The only thing that can be tricky with Miral is if you attack with it, then the opponent might just block or might be able to kill it. So you don't necessarily always want to attack with it, but there is something here that works pretty well. We can attack with it and then put out Zephyr Sentinel maybe to flash out and bring it back to our hand if we don't want it to die, and it still leaves all those tokens on the battlefield. But then your opponent can have the ability to cast their instants or sorceries, no, their instants on your turn, which you might not want to do, but if they haven't prepared for it that turn, maybe they wouldn't be ready to cast something like that. But we could also use Rescue Retriever, which is this lovely looking dog creature. It's also a flash. When it enters, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each other soldier you control and prevent all damage that would be dealt to other attacking soldiers. So attack with Miral, make a bunch of 1/1 soldier tokens, then put out the Retriever, which stops Miral from being destroyed by damage, and puts a +1 counter on all those soldiers you've just made. So it's one way to go really, really wide. If you don't have Harbin to go over the top, then you can go really wide with Miral. And if you have lots of other soldiers get +1/+1, we can tap loads of soldiers to draw lots of cards with Sky Strike Officer, which is really good as well. So there's some other cards that aren't that exciting, like Mass Production, makes 4 tokens for 6 mana, which, yeah, isn't particularly exciting. Aeronaut Cavalry, it's a 3/4 flyer for 5 mana. When it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on another soldier. It's okay. So obviously, if you'd probably rather have more copies of Harbin or Veteran than have these other cards that don't do as much. But that's what we're getting in the starter deck. The alchemy cards we've got here are by Elspeth's Command, which is a nice 3 mana enchantment that you can choose one of the 3 different modes each turn, but it has to be something you didn't choose last turn, so it has to change every turn. You can give a soldier +1/+1 and flying, or you can give a soldier card in your hand +1/+1 and vigilance, or you can create a 1/1 token every turn. So that's a nice thing to kind of keep things growing or keep things going wider. And then we've also got Patch Plate Resolute, a 3/3 soldier. It's an artifact. I like 3/3 artifacts because they get around Cut Down, they get around Go for the Throat, which are the 2 main removal cards that black are going to have. So you can get around that. But when it enters or leaves, your next creature spell will enter. Your next creature will enter with an additional +1 counter on it, and you can unearth this as well. So you can get extra counters all over the place with Patch Plate Resolute. But I'd still probably rather have another Sky Strike Officer or Harbin or Veteran. So these things are much better, I guess. But hey, that's what you get in there. Survivor of Corliss is good because it's first strike, and you don't have Thalia in this deck. So having a first strike, it's a 1/1, but you can boost it with counters and Veteran and Tactician. So it could be a 2/2, a 3/3 first strike, which is a really good solid defender. But if it does die, you can exile it from your graveyard and get some value from it there as well, which is really nice. The rare lands we get here are specifically the soldier one, Fortified Beachhead. When it enters, you can reveal a soldier from your hand, and it enters tapped if you don't, or if you don't control a soldier. And then for 5 mana, you can tap it and give all soldiers +1/+1 till end of turn. So considering Harbin is so cheap, if you get up to maybe having 7 mana and you have lots of creatures, you could play Harbin, you can attack with all the other soldiers, and you can even tap the Beachhead at instant speed to add +1/+1. And your opponent might not be thinking that you can do this. They might not be expecting it. So it's kind of a nice trick. But yeah, there's the blue and white soldier deck. It's almost as good. Well, maybe not almost. It's very similar to the meta deck that's out there, but you can improve it. If you don't have these cards already to create the soldier deck, then you're going to get lots of rares that are, and mythics that are going to be really useful in that soldier deck. So that's the blue and white soldiers. We then have white and black Phyrexians. So this looks a bit like lots of draft decks that I had actually, but they work really well together. So the main cards we have here are Grafted Butcher. When it enters, other Phyrexians gain menace until end of turn, and they all get +1/+1 as long as this is out on the battlefield. If it dies, you can return it by sacrificing an artifact or creature and paying 4 mana. So you can bring it back. So it's kind of hard to deal with. We've also got Bloated Processor, which is a really good Phyrexian spell. You can sacrifice another Phyrexian put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and then when it dies, you incubate where X is equal to its power. So you can make a 3/3 or a 4/4 token. These incubator tokens as well, when they transform, they are Phyrexian creatures. So if we have something like Phyrexians get +1/+1 or gain menace, then that affects the tokens as well. We've got Ichor Drinker, which is a nice thing to sacrifice because it's only a 1/1. But when it does go to the graveyard, we also get to exile it and incubate 2, so we get some extra value for it. And it's only 1 mana to do that, so it's kind of a cheap way of getting more incubator tokens out there. The Progenitor Exarch can make lots of incubator tokens. So the way the mana cost for this works is it's 2x and a white, and we get to incubate 3x times. So basically, if we're paying 3 mana in total, we get to incubate 3 once. You make 1 3/3 incubator token. If you pay 5 mana, so we're paying 1 white and the X twice. So that's 5 mana in total. We'll get to incubate 3 twice. And if we paid 7 mana, we could incubate 3 times. So that's how it works. Every time you pay an extra 2, you get to do an extra incubator token, which feels kind of cheap, adding lots of 3/3 tokens onto the board. And we can transform them without paying mana because we can just tap Progenitor Exarch to transform them as well. If we have Nord's Inquisitor out, and we have 2 copies, so maybe we'll have 2 of them out, it incubates 2 as well, which is nice. But also when you transform a Phyrexian or transform an incubator into the Phyrexian, it gets an extra +1 counter onto it. So we can make lots of pretty big tokens with this deck. We've got Ossification for removal, Phyrexian Missionary for some more lifelink and returning creature cards from our graveyard to our hand. We've got Phyrexian Awakening, which incubates 4 and gives other Phyrexians Vigilance, which is pretty big if you're going to have loads of these tokens. We've also got Gix and Phyrexian Arena to keep drawing cards at the expense of a bit of life, so it's nice to have lifelink with the Missionary and the Ichor Drinker there as well. Sculpted Perfection gives all other Phyrexians +1/+1 and has its own incubator token. We've got Deadly Derision and Pile On, which are good removal spells. Convoke is great because we're going to make lots of creatures, and Surveilling 2 means we can put some things into our graveyard if they're going to be useful there. So like Ichor Drinker, for example, might be useful in the graveyard, or anything that we can just bring back with the Missionary. We've got Essence of Orthodoxy, which is a 5 mana Phyrexian spell. This is one that you couldn't open in March of the Machine packs, but you could craft it. I can't remember exactly what the reason for that was, but there's one of each color. And this one is a flying 3/3. When it enters or another Phyrexian enters the battlefield, you incubate 2. Now, when you transform an incubator into a Phyrexian, it's not a Phyrexian entering the battlefield because it entered the battlefield as an artifact token, and it's already on the battlefield when it transforms into a Phyrexian. So that doesn't trigger the incubate 2, but obviously all your other creatures coming in that are Phyrexians will trigger that ability. And then we have Alabaster Host Intercessor, which is kind of an expensive Brutal Cathar. It's a 3/4, so it doesn't die to cut down, doesn't die to lightning strike. And you can plane cycle it, so you can pay 2 mana to find an extra planes from your deck if you happen to draw it early and don't have enough land. So it's nice to have that option as well. Infected Defector is a 4/3 that when it dies, you incubate 3, which is not particularly exciting. It's probably better to swap for something else. If you wanted to make more Grafted Butchers or Bloated Processors, they'd probably do a better job. Or even Norn's Inquisitors, because it makes all the other incubate tokens bigger rather than having this common Infected Defector there. But that's what you get in the starter deck. We've got some alchemy cards here. We've got March Towards Perfection, which will allow us to cast our next Phyrexian creature spell with an additional +1/+1 counter and Death Touch counter onto it. And we can draft a card from the spellbook. Now, the way that drafting from a spellbook works, if you haven't done it before, is you have these 15 cards in the spellbook, and I think, because I'm not used to doing this, I think I'm right, but correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I think it automatically picks 3 random cards from the spellbook, and then you get to choose from those 3 which one you get. So you don't get to choose from all 15, and it's not like you have no choice, so there's still some choice there, some strategy in what you pick. There are some creatures, I won't go through all of them because there's 15, some creatures that are better than others. So if we want to get a Phyrexian Flesh Gorger that comes in possibly with an extra +1 counter on it and Death Touch, then that's pretty powerful. We've also got like the Obliterator, which is a great creature. You've got some other things that aren't that exciting, but Archfiend of Vadros is a good one to get out as well, because a 7/7 with Death Touch that's flying, the opponent has to deal with it. So the thing about the oil counters coming off and you would lose if it has no oil counters left probably won't come up, because your opponent will have to deal with it before you get to that point. And the other ones here, yeah, they all have their different use cases, I guess. So you have to look through all of them and see what comes up when you play the card. We've also got Seed Pod Caretaker, which is a 2/2 for 3. When it enters, you can put a +1 counter on an artifact or creature you control. So artifacts would be the incubator tokens, or you can transform an incubator token that you control. So that would normally cost 2, but we're paying 3 here to get a 2/2 and transform something, which I guess is slightly better value. It's not particularly exciting. Oh, this one isn't an alchemy card. I thought this was alchemy, but I think it's just a standard card that I've never seen before because no one plays it. So I don't know if it's really any good. I think if it was good, people would probably play it more often. But yeah, so we've got March is the alchemy card there. And have we got any other alchemy cards? I don't think we do. Okay, so this is the one that's basically only got 1 alchemy card in it, or 2 copies of 1 alchemy card, which makes this possibly the most standard friendly deck of these new starters. You get the Caves of Koilos, which is the black and white pain land. So it does damage to you when you tap it for the color. So we do have a few things that do damage to you. You do kind of want to have the lifelink. Maybe more Phyrexian missionaries would work well in this deck. Take out some of the bigger things. But yeah, so that's the black and white deck. Pretty standard friendly. Maybe not quite as powerful, but it's kind of hard to say. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so next we have the red and white, the equipment deck. Now, there's some things in this deck that I really like. We've got Nahiri Forged in Fury, which is a 6 mana 5/4, which seems expensive, which is why it has affinity for equipment. Because we have lots of other equipment like the Blade Hold War Whip, or the like Hex Gold Sledge, or the Barbed Batterfist, Hex Gold Halberd, all these other Mirrodin artifact cards. So we're casting artifacts, but they're making a 2/2 rebel token at the same time, which automatically equips to it, which is kind of like a 2-for-1, because if the opponent wants to kill the creature, you can then put the equipment onto something else, which makes it feel like the equipment deck should be a particularly good one, but doesn't seem to have a place in standard right now, which is a bit of a shame. It seems kind of fun. But yeah, so we have Nahiri with affinity for equipment. So for every equipment we control, it costs 1 less. So it could be as little as 2 mana to cast Nahiri. And whenever an equipped creature we control attacks, we exile the top card of our library. We can play it this turn, and we can cast equipment this way for free. So we might get something like a Dragon Wing Glider that doesn't cost 5 mana. It's actually completely free. We might get Hexgold Hoverwings. We've got the Volshock Splitter. We've got, yeah, like those other ones I went over before. So there's lots of equipments that we can do that could be cast for nothing. But if we do get other things that can be cast for the normal spell, that's not bad either. So we've also got Rebel Salvo, which I really like as a 5 damage instant speed, 3 mana, but also with affinity for equipment. So if you have any other for Mirrodin artifacts out, then this is going to be 2 mana or 1 mana for 5 damage to any target. Well, to creature or planeswalker, but still. Also, it gets around indestructible, which is really good. So it seems like a really good removal spell. We've also got Unleash Shell, which can do 5 damage to a creature or planeswalker and 2 damage to the opponent, but that costs 5. So obviously not anywhere near as good as Rebel Salvo. Just having the extra 2 damage to the opponent probably isn't going to make a difference. And for an extra 2 mana, that's kind of expensive. So it's not the best one. I'd probably take that out and put some more Rebel Salvos in if you wanted to make this deck a bit better. We've also got Octida Finisher, which will be a finisher for the game if you have lots of equipment out, because it costs 7 mana, but it can cost less with affinity for equipment. It's a 7/5 trample, and if you get something like the Blade Hold War Whip onto it and give it double strike, and possibly anything else that's going to give it, you know, +1 or first strike, it's already got trample, then you're going to have a really good finishing creature there. What else do we have that's alchemy? We have Kemba's Outfitter. When it enters, we can make equipment only cost 1 to equip, which is quite relevant when you have some things that cost 5 to equip. It'd be nice to make them a lot cheaper. But we do also have other things that cause equipment to be cheaper, like Astor Bearer of Blades. When it enters, you can look at the top 7 of your library, reveal an equipment from among them, put it into your hand. and equipment only costs 1 to equip. So we basically get to move these around quite a lot. We've got Kemba Car Enduring, which is a creature where cats entering can attach you can attach equipment to cats that are entering immediately, and other equipped creatures get +1/+1 as well. We can make tokens with it if we ever get to that point. But we can basically get these things out and give them any one of these equipment straight away, which is really nice. Denitha Benalia's Hope doesn't see much play. It's a 5 mana 4/4 first strike vigilance lifelink, and when it enters you can put auras or equipment cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So we do have an aura. We have Planar Disruption, but this is a kind of pacify type aura, and it does say here you may put it from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield attached to Denitha. So you don't want to be casting your Planar Disruption with this. You basically want to get any other equipment card that comes out, but it enters the battlefield and attaches to Denitha. So I presume it still makes the 2/2 token, although I haven't tried that one out. Maybe it still makes the 2/2 rebel token and then attaches. We'll have to see. We've got Bladegraph Aspirant that makes equipment cheaper again. So if we have the Astor Bearer of Blades that makes equipment only cost 1, and we have Bladegraph Aspirant, equipment spells cost 1 less to cast, and activated abilities that target this creature cost 1 less to activate. So we can equip everything to this, and it has Menace to start with. We can equip everything to this for free once it comes out if we have Astor out as well. So that works really well together. So the other alchemy card we've got here is Blade Hold Cleaver as a 4 mana for Mirrodin artifact. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, so you're going to have a 4/4 creature come in. So it has the 2/2 rebel attached to it. Whenever the equipped creature dies, you draft a card from the spellbook. So again, we've got 15 cards here. It shows 16 because the 16th one is just showing you the token that it would make. But other than that, the spellbook is just 15 cards. And there are different cards in there that do various things. I don't know if there's anything that's particularly amazing in there. We've got this mythic. Whenever it attacks, you create 2/1/1 white soldier tokens that are also attacking. It don't necessarily go well in the deck, to be honest. I don't know why you'd necessarily want to have additional 1/1 soldiers attacking when there's other things we could do. But yeah, so there's all these other things here. I think Jorkadine is probably my favorite one from here. It's a 5/4 first strike. Creatures you control get +3/+0 as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. There's a good chance with this deck you're going to control 3 or more artifacts. So this isn't a 5/4. This would be an 8/4 first strike. And everything else gets +3 for the power. So I think that's probably the best thing you can get with the Blade Hold Cleaver. And that's whenever the equipped creature dies. So if you want to keep equipping that onto something else, and then it dies, and then you equip it onto something else and it dies, you're going to keep drawing extra things from the spellbook, which is a nice way to get more things out. We've got the Battlefield Forge as the rare land in this deck, which is the Pain land for red and white. And we've got, I think that's pretty much everything. These ones. Oh yeah, so Rock Hex Golden Amber. It's another rare. It's kind of interesting. I don't see it get played much, but it would be nice to try and get some use out of it. It's a 2/2 Trample Haste for 3 mana, which seems expensive. But whenever an equipped creature you control other than this one attacks or dies, you can attach all equipment attached to that to this creature. So if we attach everything to Bladegraph Aspirant for free, then we can basically put everything onto Ruck if it dies, or when it attacks, if we want to basically put it onto a trample creature. There's different things you could do with that. But yeah, so that's the red and white deck. So let's move on to Savage Scavengers. So the way this green and black or Golgari deck works is by getting value from things in your graveyard. It's kind of a little bit like the blue and black deck, but that one's more instants and sorceries in your graveyard and bringing them back out. And this one does a lot more for creatures being in your graveyard. So where should we start with this one? We have Sauron, the Necromancer here. Now this one doesn't work amazingly in this deck. I mean, it's a good card to start with because it's a 5 mana 4/4 with Menace. When it attacks, we can exile a creature from our graveyard and create a tapped and attacking token of it. That's a copy of it, and it's a 3/3. But at the beginning of our next end step, we have to exile the token unless Sauron is our ring bearer. But there is nothing in this deck about the ring tempting you, so we don't have a ring bearer. So we always have to exile that creature, but we can attack with Sauron, make a 3/3, which then dies. There's a copy of that card, so if we have something like Glissa Sunslayer that has First Strike, Death Touch, and abilities when it does damage to a player. I guess it still works pretty well like that. It's just a shame that we don't have a Way of the Ring tempting you as well. We've also got Shadow of the Enemy, which is a Lord of the Rings card. It's a 6 mana black sorcery. Exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard. You probably don't want to do this to your own because you get lots of value from creatures being in your graveyard, but it depends on what's going on. You can mill lots of things and put them into your graveyard. So you might want to cast this on yourself, but you can cast spells from among those creature cards for as long as they remain exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast them. So it's probably better to steal your opponent's big things from their graveyard, and then you get to cast them yourself. If you're spending 6 mana on casting this, you're not far off having 7 mana to cast Natali, to cast an Attractor if your opponent has one of those. So not that I would recommend using these starter decks against top meta decks like that, but if you happen to be against one, then you could do that. The other things that work really well in this deck, we've got obviously Removal, we've got Vanquish the Weak for creatures that have power 3 or less. We have Go for the Throat for big non-artifact creatures. We have some things that keep coming back, like Cult Conscript. So when things die, it comes back out. We have Wary Thespian, which we get value when it dies. We can Surveil, which is putting more things into the graveyard. We've got Blanchwood Prowler. When it enters, we can mill some cards. We can put land cards from there into our hand, and if not, we can basically turn it into a 2/2. But I think you probably, I don't know, you might want to use that to ramp up and get some more land if you're missing your land drops. Conduit of Worlds is an interesting one where we can play lands from our graveyard, or we can choose a non-land permanent card from our graveyard and cast that this turn if it's the only card that we're casting this turn. So it's nice to be able to bring things back from our graveyard that way, which is why you probably don't want to exile everything from your graveyard. We've also got Skyfisher Spider, which is a tricky card to get around. It's a 3/3 reach. When it enters, you can sacrifice a creature. You may sacrifice, you don't have to. But when you do, you can destroy a target non-land permanent that an opponent controls. Or, well, you could destroy one that you control. Maybe if you had this in a deck where you had not Whisper of the Dross, Archfiend of the Dross, maybe you want to kill your own thing, I guess. But yeah, so you basically would want to kill something of the opponents. You might want to sacrifice a Cult Conscript or something to be able to do that. And when this dies, you gain 1 life for each creature card in your graveyard. So you want to have lots of creatures in your graveyard when this dies, because then you're going to gain some life back. We've got Terror of Toashi, which is a March of the Machine rare that I don't think I've seen anyone ever use. But it's a 4 mana 4/3 Death Touch. When it attacks, you can pay 4. And when you do, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it becomes a Phyrexian in addition to other types. So we're bringing lots of things back from the graveyard, basically. It's just all we're doing. We've got the Alchemy card here, Diminished Returner. It enters tapped. It's a 3 mana 4/3, which is not bad. We can pay 2 black to perpetually give it -1/-1 and return it to the battlefield. So comes out as a 4/3. Next time we want to pay 2, it comes out as a 3/2, and we can bring it back as a 2/1 again if we want to. It can only happen if its toughness is 2 or greater. So I guess if its toughness is 1, then we pay this, it would come back and die immediately. It won't let us do that. But yeah, so something that's a bit has a bit of recurring value, although it does get weaker each time. We've got Burrowing Razormaw. When it dies, we can mill 4 cards, but 4/2 for 3 mana isn't a bad blocker and things anyway. And the Gixian Recycler is the other Alchemy card I haven't covered yet. When it dies or goes into your graveyard from your hand or library, so if you mill it or discard it, you conjure another Gixian Recycler into your graveyard. So you can basically get a few of these into your graveyard and unearth them. So then they come back as 3/1 creatures doing some damage. And then before they sacrifice at the end of your turn with the unearth, if they exile at the end of your turn, before that happens, you might want to use a Skyfisher Spider to then sacrifice it, because it's going to go anyway, and then destroy something else. Ravenous Gigamole does some milling and returns creature cards if you want to, or adds +1 counters. And Gaia's Courser will attack, and if there are 3 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you get to draw a card every turn, which is pretty nice as well. Deathbloom Ritualist can add X mana of any color when its number of X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So basically everything here, this is draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Everything here is value for creatures being in your graveyard and removing things of the opponents. So it's kind of control-y. What we're going to finish off the game with, I guess, just destroying everything the opponent has, and then maybe being able to cast all those again. It's like drawing loads of cards, but you get to use the opponent's things against them, which is pretty fun. So that's the green and black deck. And we have here Llanowar Waste, which is also the pain land for red. No, for black and green. I'm so confused with all the colors. This is the pain land for black and green. If you don't have 4 copies of that, then you'll be getting one of those when these decks come out. 2 more to go. Okay, Scrapyard, Sacrifice. So this one is a sacrifice deck. We have things like Stormclaw Rager that can sacrifice things, put +1 counters onto itself and draw cards. We have some things we can sacrifice like Sanitarium Skeleton, which will come back if we want to. It's an arena card, not a standard card, so that won't be in this deck if you want to use it in the standard. We also have, what's the other alchemy card is here? The Antiquarian, or the Phalagi Antiquarian, if I'm saying that right, is a 3/3 haste for 4 mana. When it enters, you conjure a duplicate of another target non-token creature or artifact you control into your graveyard, and it gains Unearth for 1 and a red. So there's lots of things you might want to unearth. Maybe a Rankle and Torbran. We want to unearth. Maybe we want to get an extra Phyrexian Dragon Engine into the graveyard, because when we unearth that, we can discard what's left of our hand if we have anything and draw 3 more cards, which is nice. When we've got Dragon Engine, we've also got Mishra Claimed by Gix, which is a meld card that I don't think ever really took off as much as the other. Well, Urza, I think, was the best meld card from Brothers War, and Titania didn't get very much play at all, but Mishra is kind of in the middle. If you get to meld it, then it's a pretty strong creature. It's a 9/9. It's an artifact, so you can't kill it with, small removal. You can't kill it with Go for the Throat. And you get to make the opponent discard cards or take damage. You can destroy artifacts or planeswalkers, give your things menace and trample, give everything the opponent has -1/-1. So if they have things with low toughness, they're going to die. Or you can create 2 tapped Power Stone tokens. The Power Stone tokens probably won't make that much difference in this deck, but if we do have something we can sacrifice, we can use Power Stone Fracture to destroy the opponent's things as well. So if we do get to meld Mishra, it's pretty powerful. I think the game's over by that point, because your opponent probably doesn't have anything to get rid of it. They might, they could get it with an ossification or something like that. There are things that can get rid of it, but most of the main removal, a lot of the things that people might have, are not going to be able to deal with this 9/9 legendary artifact. The other things we have, Rankle and Torbran, which can make your things deal an extra 2 damage. So if you have lots of little things, they're going to do 2 damage more each time. Or we can create treasure tokens or sacrifice creatures. But a 3/4 flying first strike haste creature is pretty good in itself. The other things we have just work on sacrificing. So Gixian Infiltrator, when you sacrifice things, gets a +1 counter. Vran, when things die, the opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. We've got Ashnod that can attack and can sacrifice creatures. So if we have a skeleton we want to sacrifice, we can make a Power Stone token from that. The only place we can use the Power Stone tokens are either casting the Dragon Engine, because it's an artifact creature, or using Power Stone Fracture. Any other way we can sacrifice... this is creature or artifact, so we could sacrifice Power Stone tokens with the Stormclaw Rager as well. And then we've got Corrupted Conviction, which we can sacrifice creatures to draw cards. So it's all sacrifice. There isn't anything here, unfortunately, which will steal the opponent's creature and put it on your side. It's nice to have that in a sacrifice deck, so you can steal the best thing and then just sacrifice it for a card and a +1 counter or something like that, or sacrifice it for 2 cards. It doesn't have that in here, unfortunately. But we do have some other things. Urabrusk's Forge works really well with things like Stormclaw Rager as well, because we're making these token creatures that attack. If they don't die, and we don't have to attack with them, if they don't die by the end of the turn, we can sacrifice them with some other ability like Stormclaw Rager or Corrupted Conviction before they automatically sacrifice based on the Forge. So we get extra value from these tokens that just generate. So that's what we've got there. Oh, we've also got Sengir Connoisseur, a vampire 3/3 flyer, which isn't the best card, but whenever 1 or more creatures dies, so on your side or on the opponent's side, you put a +1 counter on this. It's going to happen once each turn. So it's a 3/3, but it can grow pretty quickly if you just let things die quite often. And you can sacrifice your own things. You can use instants to kill the opponent's things. So there's lots of things you can do with that. Okay, so that was the red and black deck. Did I go through the land? Do we have the pain land? Yeah, we did have the pain land for that one as well. And then we've got the green and blue deck. Now this one is different to the other ones, because this one is, let me check, 25 alchemy cards, and they might all be Lord of the Rings alchemy cards. Oh no, this one's not. 25 alchemy cards and 10 standard cards, 25 lands. We get the Pain Land for green and blue. So we've got lots of new cards in this one. This is one where if you play it, it's not going to be anywhere near as familiar as the other ones, because the other ones use lots of cards that have been around for a while. But in this one, we have things that basically scry and add +1 counters. So Arwen is a good one for this deck. It's a 2/2. Whenever you scry, you put a +1 counter on a target creature. It can scry 2 for 6, which is kind of expensive, but if you're going later into the game, then you might want to do that. We've got Nimrodel Watcher, which is a 2/1 that gets +1/+0 when you scry, and it can't be blocked this turn, so it can be a 3 damage creature going through. We've got Elven Farsight, which can scry 3 and reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you draw the card. So if you're scrying 3, there's a good chance you're going to find a creature in scrying and put it to the top, and then you basically get to draw a card. So you get the scry synergy. You're basically getting to scry 2 for the next 2 things, and you're drawing a card for 1 mana. So that's a really powerful common, actually. So we've got Marwyn's Kindred, which can conjure Marwyn the Nurturer, which can add forest, add green mana equal to its power. It starts as a 1/1, but whenever another elf enters the battlefield, you put a +1 counter on Marwyn, and these are all pretty much elves. And we can add +1 counters onto it from things like Arwen as well. So then we can basically grow this and get lots and lots of green mana. There is one artifact that I think was really cool. In fact, no, this one's really cool anyway. Mirror of Galadriel is a legendary artifact. You can scry 1 and draw a card for 5 mana, which is kind of expensive, but it's 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So let's have a look at what legendary creatures you have. Arwen is a legendary creature. I don't think they are. And then we've got Glorfindel, which is a legendary creature. We have Nissa, which is a legendary creature. Marwyn is a legendary creature. Azori is a legendary creature. We've got Elrond, who's a legendary creature. And I think, is that everything? No, we've also got Celeborn the Wise is a legendary creature as well. So we have lots of legendaries. So there's a good chance that if we have a few elves out on the battlefield, this ability to scry 1, then draw a card, is going to be really, really cheap. And we can obviously use things like Marwyn to create loads of additional mana to be able to do this. But you can only do it once per turn because you have to tap it. But, you know, once per turn is still pretty good for being able to scry and get the scry synergies and to draw a card as well. The other one I really like, actually it's an enchantment, not an artifact, is Lost Isle Cooling. Now, if the game's going on long, and it could do when you've got all these creatures that grow, the opponent might not be able to get through to you. Whenever you scry, you put a verse counter on Lost Isle Cooling, and for 6 mana, you can exile this enchantment. You draw a card for each verse counter on it, so it might be that you have, 4 or 5 cards that you're going to draw from exiling this, which is not bad for 6 mana. But if it had 7 or more verse counters on it, and I think you can get to that. If it has 7 or more, you take an extra turn after this one. So you're going to be drawing 7 cards, at least, if you have 7 counters on it, and then taking an extra turn. So you're going to have so many cards, so many things you can do from there, that I think if you get to that point, you've basically won the game. We've also got Grey Haven's Negotiator, which is a flash that enters and scries, so you can scry on the opponent's turn pretty easily as well, which can add +1 counters onto things if you have Arwen out, which is nice. We've got Chance Met Elves. Whenever you scry, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Can only trigger once each turn, so again, something that grows as we're scrying. We've got Glorfindel, which has the ability of whenever we scry, we can choose one. It gets +1/+1 till end of turn. We can choose that either must be blocked this turn if able, or it can't be blocked by more than 1 creature each combat this turn. So depending on what the opponent has out, we might want to say it has to be blocked, or it can't be blocked by more than 1 thing. Maybe if the opponent only has some 1/1s or 2/2s, and we get to attack through, and they have to block with 1 thing and lose it. Seems pretty good. We've got Nissa, which has landfall. Whenever land enters, we can add 1 mana of any color. If it's the second time that this resolves, then we get to reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal an elf or an elemental card and put that into our hand. Now, I don't actually know if there's any way we can put down additional land in this deck. There might be something that I've missed, but I don't think there is. So that basically means that we're only going to get the ability to start with, get an extra mana. We won't get search for an elf, but you could just replace something in here with those lands that sacrifice themselves and then grab an island or forest, and that will trigger this ability a second time. We've got Tribute to the World Tree, so any small elves that come out get an extra 2+1 counters, or if they're bigger ones, we get to draw a card, which keeps those cards flowing. Celeborn the Wise, whenever we attack with one or more elves, we get to scry again. Whenever we scry, it gets +1 till end of turn for each card looked at while scrying this way. So, if we attack with 3 elves, it's still only going to scry 1. So it gets +1/+1. Only gets that once for looking at one card. But if we have something else that can scry, so like we've got Greyhaven's Negotiator, we can flash that in, scry 1 again, then Celeborn can grow a bit more. Galadhrim Guide enters the battlefield, scry 2, which again enables all those synergies. Elrond, whenever you scry, you put a +1 counter on each of up to X creatures, where X is the number of cards looked at while scrying this way. So if we're scrying 3 with Elven Farsight, that makes that even much more better, having Elrond out as well. And whenever a creature with a +1 counter on it becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. And lots of our creatures are going to have +1s on them because of Tribute to the World Tree, because of Arwen. Basically, we can just get +1 counters all over the place. And so, yeah, we're going to be drawing lots of cards as well. We've got Azorius that enters. We can pay 3 and we can proliferate twice. And whenever we proliferate, we draw a card. If we have counters on things, proliferate is going to work really well for us as well. And then we've just got Desynchronized to return a non-land permanent to the top or bottom of its owner's library. And we can scry 2. So it's a way of just removing something as a kind of tempo play. Get it back off the board really quickly. Get the scry synergies. And then hopefully take out their blockers so that you can get through all the damage with your elves that are all boosted. So that's the green and blue starter deck. This one is very, very alchemy friendly and very standard unfriendly because there's only a few standard cards in here. So this is a deck you're not going to be playing in standard, but if you are interested in playing alchemy, then you might want to put together as many of these elf scrying synergy cards as you can. There are definitely some things you can do to upgrade this deck as well. And then you might have a pretty good deck to use in the alchemy queue as well. So I'm sure this can be upgraded for that if alchemy is your thing. So that's the 10 decks. And that's all I have to say going through all of those. So let me know what you think in the comments below about these future precons, about these starter decks. They will be coming out probably, like I said, end of July, around August or so. Just before rotation, I think, is when they normally come out. But yeah, so even if you don't like alchemy, there's not lots of alchemy cards in here, apart from the Sylvan Wisdom deck, which has like 2/3 or more than 2/3 of the cards are alchemy cards. So if you do want to use any of these decks, if you're just starting out, you can just swap out a few cards and still use them in standard. It's also interesting to note that none of the cards in any of these decks come before Dominaria United, which means in September, when rotation happens for alchemy, so it's not happening for standard this year, when rotation happens for alchemy and we lose Midnight Hunt, Crimson Vow, Kamigawa, Streets of New Capenna, and Baldur's Gate from alchemy, then these decks will still be legal. Obviously, you don't want to have starter decks that are not going to be legal in one of the main formats from September. And I know people don't like alchemy being a main format, but to be honest, it's going that way. And I don't think there's anything too wrong with that. But I'm sure lots of people have strong opinions, and you can tell me in the comments what you think about that. So those are the 10 decks. That's my breakdown of them, going through them pretty quickly. And yeah, you just have to play with them and you'll get a chance when they come out and see which one you like, see which cards you want to add to other decks. There's lots of rares and mythics there, so it's pretty good, even if you're just getting loads of free rares and mythics. So don't complain about getting the decks because they're free. So why would you complain about that? Okay, so that's all we got time for. Thanks for watching this video to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want any future content. And I will see you in the next video.